My brother forged documents, claiming he owned 50% of my company. When I found out, I decided to destroy him with evidence he couldn't escape. I, 35, own a profitable chain of fitness clubs in North Texas. There are 4 locations now, with 2 more planned for next year. We generate roughly $1.2 million in sales each year, and I employ approximately 50 individuals, including trainers, front desk staff, maintenance crews, and administrative professionals. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a GI Bill and an ambition after leaving the Marine Corps at the age of 23. However, this is not a story about my business success or how I built my empire from nothing. It's about how my poisonous, dysfunctional family tried to drain me dry for years, and what occurred when I eventually resolved to fully destroy them, rather than simply walking away, as a decent person would do. Growing up in suburban Dallas, my family dynamic was quite evident from the start. We had 2 children in our household. Me and my younger brother Lysander. He's 32 now. Lysander was always the golden boy who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, whereas I was forever presented as the responsible one who never required attention, assistance, or acknowledgement. You are familiar with the type of family arrangement. Lysander was applauded heartily for properly tying his shoes, whereas I had to earn everything via blood, sweat, tears, and flawless behavior. When I was 17, a senior in high school, I worked 2 part-time jobs after school every day to accumulate enough money for a quality used automobile. I worked in a small grocery store, bagging goods and collecting shopping carts. I also worked weekends for a landscaping company, performing manual labor in the Texas heat. Meanwhile, Lysander was caught for shoplifting video games from the local mall. Instead of suffering any serious penalties for his criminal activity, my parents purchased a brand new Honda Civic to boost his confidence and self-esteem. When I asked where my car was after 8 months of saving every penny I earned, my father looked at me and said, "You're more responsible and mature. You'll figure it out yourself, as you always do." After graduating from high school, I immediately joined the Marines because college was out of reach for me financially. Our family was purportedly struggling financially and unable to pay tuition. Meanwhile, Lysander had a full college experience thanks to mom and dad's mysterious secret stockpile of money, which came out of thin air whenever their beautiful baby boy needed something vital. I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps, served 2 deployments overseas, and returned home with discipline, work ethic, and real-world experience. I used my GI Bill benefits to acquire a business degree while working full-time at a local gym chain, where I learned everything about the fitness industry from the ground up. I lived in a studio apartment that was essentially a glorified closet for 3 years, eating nothing but cheap pasta, canned tuna, and peanut butter sandwiches, and saving every dime I could to start my first gym. Lysander? He dropped out of college after 3 years of relentless partying, 4 changed majors, and barely passing grades. But according to my parents, he was simply discovering his true path in life and exploring his creative alternatives. By the age of 30, I had 2 highly successful gyms, a nice house in a decent neighborhood, and was working hard to build true generational wealth. Lysander was 27 years old and had never kept a job for longer than 8 months. His routine was predictable. He'd acquire an entry-level job, work just long enough to qualify for unemployment benefits, then purposely dismiss himself and live on government aid while waiting for the proper career opportunity. But guess who was still the family's favorite? He had never done anything substantial or constructive in his adult life. Then Lysander met Ophelia. And that's when our family situation shifted from annoying to completely ridiculous. Ophelia represented every terrible cliché about materialistic, superficial women in one irritating person. She got phony chest implants, lip injections, eyelash extensions, and acrylic nails that were so long and intricate that she couldn't do basic activities like type or unlock car doors. She'd never worked a genuine job in her life, yet she always had the latest iPhone model, designer purses worth hundreds of dollars, and outfits that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. She hooked herself to Lysander like a parasitic leech because he was ignorant and naive enough to believe he could finance her absurdly extravagant lifestyle with his unemployment checks. And what about my parents? They adored her because she was meant to inspire Lysander to be more ambitious and help him evolve into a responsible adult. Yeah, he was inspired to discover increasingly inventive methods to spend money he didn't have and would never get. The girl also had the cognitive abilities of a houseplant. I recall one particularly terrible family dinner when she inquired if my fitness centers were similar to Planet Fitness but more expensive, and then proceeded to confidently describe to me how the fitness industry operated based solely on what she'd seen in romantic films and reality TV shows. This amazing explanation came from someone who truly felt that cardiac activity was bad for your health since it made you too thin and feeble. About 2.5 years ago, my parents' phone calls were much more regular and urgent. These weren't casual, "Hey, how's business going?" social calls, but rather direct, Lysander needs help with his electricity bill, emergency calls. Or, Lysander's car needs expensive repairs, crisis calls. Or, my personal favorite, Lysander and Ophelia are having an unexpectedly difficult month financially. Calls for bailouts. Initially, the requested amounts appeared to be little and reasonable, $400 for utilities and $600 for car troubles. I'm not gonna lie, I helped out because I assumed that's what family members do for one another at difficult times, right? But every time I wired money to aid them, Lysander never called to thank me or explain the issue. Mom was always the one to make the initial request on his behalf, followed by a thank you call, as if he were still a helpless child incapable of handling his own communications. The demanded amounts gradually increased, and the supporting excuses became more inventive and complicated. $1,200 for a deposit on a much nicer apartment because their existing one was allegedly causing Ophelia's bad allergies. She wanted to live somewhere more Instagrammable. $2,800 when Lysander was purportedly laid off unexpectedly, which I later discovered meant he was dismissed for arriving 2 hours late 3 days in a row while intoxicated. $3,500 for Ophelia's alleged emergency dental work, which turned out to be solely cosmetic veneers since she wanted to become a social media influencer. The breaking point should have come last Christmas, when Ophelia posted elaborate Instagram stories documenting her week-long luxury spa retreat in Scottsdale, complete with expensive treatments and designer shopping, the same week that Lysander called me crying and demanding $2,200 for urgent car repairs that couldn't wait. But I was still playing the good brother character like a total idiot. The true wake-up call occurred 8 months ago, when I went to Mom and Dad's house for our weekly Sunday family dinners. When I entered through the front door, Ophelia was virtually throwing her left hand in everyone's faces, displaying this unbelievably massive engagement ring that had to cost at least $20,000. "Look what my amazing Lysander surprised me with," she exclaimed like a giddy teenager. "Isn't it absolutely perfect? I've been wanting something exactly like this for months and months." I looked right at Lysander, who was desperately avoiding eye contact as if his life depended on it. 4 weeks ago, he called me, in tears, to say he needed $3,800 for unforeseen medical expenditures because he didn't have health insurance. "That's quite an impressive ring," I said, attempting to keep my tone neutral. "Must have been a very significant purchase." Ophelia laughed and did this goofy little hair flip gesture. "Oh, Lysander always finds a way to give me exactly what I deserve. He's so generous and thoughtful about showing his love. Yeah, generous with my hard-earned money, and attentive in keeping it hidden from me." During the same uncomfortable dinner, Ophelia made multiple passive-aggressive remarks about how some people are simply not relationship material, all while staring directly at me with apparent judgment. I was 35 and single by choice. I had been too preoccupied with expanding my business empire and safeguarding my financial future to consider dating or marriage. But she made me feel like a pitiful failure because I wasn't married to someone who continuously squandered my money. "Maybe you should focus less on those gym things and more on finding a wife," she suggested with a patronizing sneer. "I mean, what's the point of making all that money if you don't have anyone special to spend it on?" My mother actually nodded in perfect agreement, as if Ophelia were imparting deep insight. "She makes a really good point, Silas. You can't work every single day forever." That night, while laying in my own bed in my own home, which I had paid for with my own money, I made a clear decision. I was finished being their personal bank account. Things became unusually quiet for a few months after I stopped responding to their increasingly urgent money solicitations. I honestly thought they'd learnt their lesson about financial responsibility, or had found another stupid victim to fund their absurd dream lifestyle. I was completely wrong about both scenarios. Then Mom called 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I should have realized something was wrong based on her tone alone. "Silas, sweetheart," she said in that unnaturally sweet, unduly joyful tone she saves for when she wants something incredibly vital. "Are you planning to come for Thanksgiving dinner this year?" To be honest, I had considered skipping the entire affair. Every family reunion felt like an exhaustive theatrical production, in which I was compelled to play the role of the successful son, who should be eternally grateful for the opportunity to address everyone else's financial and personal difficulties. But I made a critical mistake by saying, "Sure, I will come." "That's absolutely wonderful," Mom said, far too relieved and delighted for a simple Christmas dinner invitation. "It'll be so nice to have the entire family together for such a special occasion." The overwhelming joy and obvious relief in her voice should have been my first significant red flag. Mom was never actually enthused about holiday dinners, unless there was a huge underlying motive. When I arrived to their house on Thanksgiving morning, Ophelia answered the door in what appeared to be a whole new dress from head to toe, perhaps costing more than most people earn in a week. Her artificial nails were freshly painted with an exquisite crystal and glitter pattern that must have taken hours at an expensive salon. "Silas," she said with the most obvious phony smile I'd ever seen. "Oh my goodness, thank God you're finally here. We've been waiting and waiting for you to arrive." Red flag number 1 was literally waving madly in my face. Lysander stood in the living room, looking more scared and agitated than I had ever seen him in our entire life together. When I stepped into the room, he could barely look up from his phone screen, and his leg was hopping rapidly, as if he was genuinely concerned about something significant happening. "Hey there, bro," he muttered without making any eye contact. Red flag number 2 has now joined red flag number 1 in a developing line of evident warning indications. Dad was acting normally, asking his typical surface-level questions about how things were doing at the fitness centers, while Mom rushed around the kitchen making unnecessary dramatic gestures and movements. Everything looked typical and ordinary until we sat down at the dinner table, plates full. Mom cleared her throat in that very specific manner, and gave me that particular look, the very same expression she used to give me when I was a kid. As if she were ready to ask me to undertake extra household chores that Lysander always managed to get excused from. "So, Silas," she explained, carving her turkey with almost surgical accuracy and methodical movements. "Lysander and Ophelia have some really exciting news they want to share with the entire family. Here we go with whatever sophisticated plan they've devised this time." Lysander squirmed uncomfortably in his chair, as if he were sitting on something sharp and uncomfortable. "We're getting married next month." "Congratulations," I responded. But something felt odd about the rushed timing and haste. Why the sudden need to get married so quickly? "It's going to be absolutely beautiful and perfect," Ophelia exclaimed excitedly, clearly excited. "Small ceremony, just immediate family members, very intimate and romantic." Mom grinned, clearly proud and satisfied. They found the most perfect venue possible, very elegant and sophisticated. I waited patiently because after years of experience, I knew there was always a catch with these people. "The only thing is," Lysander finally remarked, looking squarely at his plate rather than at me, "we're running a little short on the venue deposit and all the catering expenses." And there it was. The true reason for the mandatory family dinner meeting. "How short are we talking exactly?" I inquired, knowing full well that this would be absolutely absurd and outrageous. Lysander and Ophelia exchanged one of those meaningful stares that couples have before tagging someone for money. Then Ophelia leaned forward across the table, wearing an outrageously entitled smile that made my skin crawl with revulsion. "It's honestly not that much money when you think about it," she answered dismissively, waving her hand as if she were talking about change. "Just $22,000. I actually almost choked on the food in my mouth. $22,000? Well, Mom replied right away, clearly having practiced this speech. "When you actually break it down properly, it's really quite reasonable for a quality wedding. The venue rental is $6,000. Professional catering is $10,000. Floral arrangements are $3,000. And then there's the photographer, the musicians, the cake, and all the other essentials." "Hold on just a minute," I said firmly. "You haven't actually paid for any of this stuff yet?" Ophelia's phony smile became substantially tighter around the edges. "We put down small deposits to hold everything, but all the full payments are due next Friday." I scanned the table slowly and deliberately. Everyone was looking at me expectantly, as if this intricate setup had previously been planned and I was simply going through the motions before opening my wallet and fixing their issues. "And you want me to pay for your entire wedding?" "Not pay for it exactly," Lysander replied hastily, attempting to sound fair. "Just help out significantly, you know, as a generous wedding gift from my successful big brother." Ophelia laughed aloud, and it was the most condescending sound I had ever heard in my life. "I mean, what else would you spend your money on anyway? You don't have a wife or children or any real family responsibilities. Your parents only love you when you pay their bills." The entire room became utterly silent. Even my parents seemed uneasy about how blatantly and viciously she had just insulted me. I carefully put down my fork and leaned back in my chair, glancing at my mother. "Is that true, Mom?" Rather than refute it, Mom smiled and nodded. "Well, if you're not willing to help family, then you can't come to family events anymore. You can't come unless you pay off your brother's credit card." The words struck me like a physical blow. After everything I'd done and all the money I'd given them over the years, they saw me as a wallet rather than a son or brother. I got up slowly, grabbed my jacket, and smiled back at her. "You know what? You're absolutely right, and that's why you'll never see me again." The transformation in the room was sudden and dramatic. Mom's confident smile disappeared instantly. Dad's face turned white. Lysander appeared to have been smacked. Ophelia's arrogant face faded as she realized what had just occurred. Their faces fell as they knew they had lost me forever. "Wait, Silas. I didn't mean..." Mom began, but I had already moved toward the door. "Yes, you did mean it. And now you get to live with it." I walked straight out the front door, not looking back. For 3 weeks following the Thanksgiving incident, my phone was continuously vibrating with incoming messages from every family member. Mom sent long, guilt-tripping text messages about how upset and wounded she was by my selfish actions over dinner. Dad left me several voicemails lecturing me on family loyalty and standing up when it really matters. Lysander sent several sad messages, usually complaining about how I was ruining his special day and hurting his happiness. But the greatest and most entertaining messages came straight from Ophelia herself. This woman gave me genuine multi-paragraph essays about how I was a greedy, bitter person who was clearly envious of Lysander's happiness and success in life. She branded me sad for being alone at my age, strongly implied that I was probably gay, and concluded with increasingly vague warnings about how I would absolutely regret this decision if Lysander became phenomenally popular. The irony was really stunning. She was calling me envious and literally begging for my money to support her extravagant lifestyle and fantasy wedding. I meticulously screenshotted each message she sent me and saved them in a separate folder. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, all of the messages came to a halt. I honestly assumed they'd either found another naive victim to fund their crazy wedding, or that they'd finally chosen to have a much smaller ceremony that they could actually afford with their own limited resources. As always, I was utterly wrong about both possibilities. 4 weeks later, my acquaintance, a loan officer at a major regional bank, contacted to provide some very fascinating and troubling information. "Hey, weird thing happened at work today," he nonchalantly stated. "I saw your brother and his fiancée at our main branch earlier this afternoon." My gut plummeted with fear. What were they doing there? They were asking about substantial business loans. But here's the strange part. They were using your fitness centers as collateral and financial references. My blood became very cold. What exactly do you mean by that? They had official-looking paperwork claiming Lysander was a 50% business partner in your company. The loan officer who met with them was immediately suspicious because the documents looked potentially fraudulent, so they didn't approve anything. But I thought you should definitely know about this situation. I quickly hung up and contacted my business counsel. After considerable investigation and research, we learned that Lysander and Ophelia had been actively seeking to obtain large loans around the Dallas metropolitan area by using wholly falsified documents saying Lysander was a major owner of my fitness center business. They'd even prepared complex bogus employment records identifying Lysander as my director of operations, making $85,000 per year. They were aggressively seeking to conduct major fraud on my business reputation, credit history, and financial status. That's when I understood these people had passed a boundary they could never recover from, and I wanted to utterly destroy them rather than simply walking away and ignoring the problem. I spent the next 6 weeks systematically gathering all available information on their situation. I did not employ private investigators or do anything unduly spectacular. I recently began paying close attention to details and asking the correct questions of the right people in my network. First, I realized that the wedding was still taking place, despite their apparent financial issues. They'd managed to save enough money for a little ceremony at a low-cost site outside of the municipal limits. But here's what was particularly interesting. Ophelia was informing everyone on her social media sites that they'd decided on an intimate wedding, and that certain people who weren't supportive of their love were not invited. She was actually portraying my unwillingness to support their wedding as an intentional exclusion from their big day. Then I discovered something quite interesting about Ophelia's background. My banker friend recalled that Ophelia had visited his branch several months before, when she and Lysander began dating seriously. She'd tried to register a business account for a multi-level marketing scheme, but during the routine credit check, numerous huge red flags showed on her financial background. I requested him to go a little more into her background. Banks exchange data, and he owed me a big favor after I helped him get a great bargain on gym equipment for his home training space. What we discovered was very amazing and eye-opening. Ophelia had quite a recorded financial history with men. She'd been married twice before. Both times to men with significant wealth and holdings. Both marriages lasted only long enough for her to obtain legal access to their financial accounts and possessions. Both ended in bitter divorce processes in which she walked away with a sizable chunk of their assets while claiming various sorts of emotional and physical abuse. Lysander was going to be the third spouse, and he had no idea about the previous two. However, that was hardly the most interesting discovery I found. The most fascinating element was what I discovered about their present financial status from numerous sources. Remember all of the emergencies and unforeseen expenses that Lysander had asked me to assist with over the previous 2 years? In some ways, those were actual emergencies. Lysander had been spiraling into considerable debt while attempting to maintain Ophelia's exorbitant lifestyle and spending habits. But instead of cutting back on expenses or having honest conversations about money, they'd been taking out payday loans at exorbitant interest rates, continuously creating new credit cards, and borrowing money from anyone who would lend it to them. They weren't simply plain broke. They were catastrophically, devastatingly broke. The type of financial scenario in which one missed payment could mean losing everything. What about Ophelia? She had no idea about their true predicament. Lysander had been desperately concealing their true financial situation from her, while feverishly attempting to find new ways to keep the money flowing, and maintain the appearance of financial success and stability. That's when I knew Lysander was no longer the spoilt golden child. He was absolutely trapped, perhaps afraid, and undoubtedly in over his head with a lady who would destroy him the moment she realized he couldn't afford her lifestyle any longer. So I decided to hasten the eventual discovery process. The wedding was planned for a Saturday afternoon in February. I obviously did not attend the ceremony, but I had more significant and strategic plans for the weekend. You see, I'd spent several weeks meticulously assembling a complete information bundle that would transform everything. Screenshots of Ophelia's abusive text messages, which called me pitiful and envious. Complete copies of all false loan documents they attempted to use, with my company details fabricated on them. And the absolute crown treasure of evidence, a lengthy background study on Ophelia's 2 past marriages, her well-documented history of financial manipulation and gold mining, as well as comprehensive proof of their present dire debt predicament. However, I did not convey any of this negative material to Lysander directly. That approach would have been too easy and predictable, and given our family dynamics, he was unlikely to believe anything I said. Instead, I delivered the complete comprehensive package directly to Ophelia's mother, along with lengthy explanations. Here's what my extensive research found regarding Ophelia's family history and circumstances. They were legitimately affluent, but they were completely consumed with their social standing, public appearances, and family reputation. Her father was a successful investment banker at a famous business, and her mother was one of those high society country club women who prioritized their family's social standing above all else. They had been financially supporting Ophelia for years without question, but they assumed she was in a serious relationship with someone financially successful and secure with promising prospects. They had no notion Lysander was bankrupt and in debt, and they certainly had no idea about their daughter's well-documented history of systematically marrying men for their money and assets. I sent the entire information packet to her mother with a short, clear note. I felt you should know who your daughter married and what kind of financial predicament she's gotten herself into. The wedding ceremony took place on Saturday afternoon. By Monday morning, 8 a.m., my phone was ringing insistently. It was Lysander, and he sounded more destroyed than any other human being I'd ever heard in my life. "Silas," he whispered, his voice quivering from sheer passion. "I desperately need to talk to you about something extremely important." "What's going on, Lysander? Can you possibly meet me somewhere today, please? I'll pay for coffee or lunch or whatever you want." He sounded completely shattered and defeated, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my primary gym site. When Lysander arrived 30 minutes later, he appeared to have not slept adequately in several days. His eyes were extremely bloodshot, his hands were visibly shaking, and he kept looking around nervously, as if he was worried someone bad might follow him. "She's completely gone," he stated without preamble or salutation. "Who's gone?" "Ophelia. She left me permanently, took absolutely everything valuable, and just disappeared." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. "Everything?" Lysander nodded miserably. "All the wedding gifts we received, the money her parents had given us for the honeymoon, even our security deposit for the apartment. She cleaned out our joint bank account down to the very last penny and vanished completely." "What exactly happened over the weekend?" "Her parents called her early Sunday morning while we were still at the hotel. They'd somehow gotten incredibly detailed information about our real financial situation, about my actual employment situation, and our debts. They flew down here immediately and had this massive screaming confrontation with her in the hotel lobby." Lysander ran his hands through his hair feverishly and repetitively. "She tried desperately telling them it was all lies and misinformation from jealous people. But then they started asking very specific questions. About money. About my employment history. About all our credit card debts and loans. And she suddenly realized the complete truth about everything. She realized you're completely broke and have been lying to her. Worse than just broke. We owe over $50,000 in credit cards, payday loans and personal debt from friends. Her parents immediately cut her off financially and told her she was completely on her own from now on. And Ophelia, he laughed with absolutely no humor whatsoever. She looked directly at me and said, I definitely didn't sign up to be poor and struggle, and just walked out of my life forever. I sipped my coffee calmly and waited for him to resume his narrative. Silas, I'm completely screwed beyond repair. Like absolutely and totally ruined beyond any hope of recovery. The apartment rent is due this week. All the credit card minimum payments are due, and I literally cannot make any of them. I'm going to lose everything I have left. What about mom and dad? Can't they help you out? Lysander's face was utterly crushed with humiliation and disgrace. They don't know how catastrophically bad the real situation actually is. They think I just need help with a few monthly bills and regular expenses. If they knew the actual truth about everything. He ran off helplessly. They'd be disappointed in you. They'd completely disown me forever and never speak to me again. You know exactly how Dad feels about financial irresponsibility and poor life choices. I almost burst out laughing at the tremendous absurdity of the scenario. Dad claimed to despise financial recklessness above all else, yet he had been personally encouraging Lysander's bad actions for years without even recognizing it. Lysander gazed up at me with the most pitiful, begging eyes I'd ever seen on another person. I know I've completely messed up everything in my life. I know I've been a terrible brother to you for years, but I'm literally begging you, Silas. Please help me one more time. I need your help more than I've ever needed anything in my entire life. How much help are we talking about exactly? $50,000 minimum. Maybe 60 to get completely clear of everything and start over with a totally clean slate. I leaned back in my chair and watched his desperate expression. $60,000 to clean up a situation that could have been avoided if he had made even one decent decision. You know what, Lysander? You're absolutely right about some things. You did completely mess up everything. And you have been a terrible brother to me for most of our adult lives. His face dropped with terrible disappointment and anguish. But more importantly than any of that, you've been a user and a parasite for your entire adult life. For years and years you've treated me like your personal ATM machine that exists solely for your benefit. You've never once asked how I'm doing personally or professionally, never offered to help me with anything whatsoever, never even bothered to say thank you when I bailed you out of your various messes and crises. Silas, please, I'm literally begging you on my knees. I'm not done talking yet. My voice was now ice cold. You married a gold-digging manipulator who insulted me repeatedly in our parents' house and then tried to commit serious fraud using my business reputation and credit. You've spent years systematically taking advantage of my success while contributing absolutely nothing to this family except constant problems, drama, and financial emergencies. Lysander was openly crying now, real tears flowing down his cheeks. I know everything you're saying is completely true. I'll change totally. I swear on everything holy. I'll get a real job immediately. I'll pay you back every single penny with interest. I'll do whatever you want me to do. No, you won't change. I stood up and carefully put on my jacket. You know why you won't actually change? Because you've never actually had to face real consequences. Every single time you've screwed up your life completely, someone has been there to fix it for you without question. Mom, Dad, me. We've all been enabling your pathetic, irresponsible behavior for decades. I gazed down at him, sad and broken in his chair like a defeated child. So, here's exactly what's going to happen moving forward. You're going to go home and figure this entire mess out completely by yourself. You're going to get any job you can possibly find and work your way out of this financial hole, $1 at a time, over many years. And maybe if you actually learn something meaningful from this experience and demonstrate real change in a few years, we can discuss having some kind of genuine relationship. Silas, please don't do this. I'm your brother. No. I firmly said, marching toward the door without looking back. You're my parents' son. There's a significant difference between those two things. I went away from him forever. 6 months later, I learned from Mom that Lysander had filed for bankruptcy and was living in a tiny studio apartment across town while working double shifts at a warehouse loading trucks for minimum wage. Ophelia had married a corporate lawyer she met on a dating service just 2 months after leaving Lysander. Mom and Dad were constantly urging me to help him financially, to be the larger person, and to forgive family since blood is thicker than water. I told them exactly what I told Lysander. Certain important life lessons can only be learnt by first-hand experience and consequences. Lysander still contacts me on occasion, maybe every few weeks. He no longer asks for money. He learned his lesson the hard way. He's just trying to check in and gradually rebuild a friendship from the ground up. The conversations are really awkward and stilted. But perhaps it is exactly how genuine change and growth should begin.